course, in terms of the kind of resolve that exists throughout since 1965 and perhaps even before and after that as well, in terms of the way that the armed forces are ready to sacrifice themselves for the defense of the motherland and the nation. And so we honor and tribute all of our armed forces and, of course, the martyrs on this very special day. The Prime Minister has also laid wreath at the Martyrs Monument, and this is special in terms of what is going on, and especially in terms of the kind of threats that exist both internally and externally to Pakistan, something which, of course, we've seen that the armed forces are always fully prepared to deal with, and have always swatted. And we've seen that every single day we hear about how more and more names have been added to the list of martyrs who have been laying down their lives in sacrifice for this motherland, including 4 valiant soldiers that we also lost today in Chitral. And this is important, especially given the kind of circumstances that exist in the country and the continuing threat that exists, and especially in terms of honoring the way that the defense of the motherland is protected because of these armed forces and their resolve. And so the nation stands by them, something that the Prime Minister has also reiterated, speaking about how this day is about vigor, valor, bravery and courage. And this is special in terms of the way that the people have always looked towards the armed forces and are continuing to look towards them and have full confidence in all of our security forces in protecting the nation and the country. And so we're going to talk more about this particular day, its importance, and of course, the honor and tribute that we want to give to our soldiers and to our martyrs, and how do we move forward in a way that we keep on putting forward this confidence in our armed forces, and how do we support them in the resolve of fighting against any threat. Our next topic is also going to be taking a look at a similar story with reference to what is going on in the country in terms of the security challenges that continue to exist, unfortunately, have spiked in light of the attacks by the TTP and a lot of other small groups that have been joining the TTP as well. And this is something that we've been dealing with, particularly since the end of the ceasefire, and then, of course, since the U.S. troop withdrawal. A lot of talk has also been moving forward with the Afghan Taliban regime, calling on to them to protect their soil to be used against any other territory, including Pakistan. Again, this call has been made today as well, while we see that there has been an attempt to attack the security posts at the Chitral bordering Afghanistan, and this is special in terms of the way that the terrorists have been thwarted and the kind of elimination that continues. But in terms of the way that these challenges have mounted, what sort of a strategy needs to be put in place, and how do we move forward, especially in terms of protecting the Pakistan-Afghanistan border? How do we involve the Afghan Taliban regime in this entire process and ensure that they do fulfill their promises? And then what sort of action points will now exist in terms of the strategy that our own armed forces are going to be developing towards the TTP and other mergers within this group, and how exactly do we move forward in protecting the country, especially provinces such as the KP that have come unfortunately under more fire. So this is going to be our discussion today, and for this, of course, I've been joined in the studios by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal. We've also been joined online in our first segment by Brigadier Retired Waqar, a senior analyst. Thank you very much for joining us and being part of the discussion, Waqar Sahab. I'll start with you in terms of what is going on. There is, of course, a lot of concern regarding the kind of security challenges that exist. But despite that, we understand that the day that we honor today, the kind of tribute that we gave to our security forces and martyrs is extremely important, not just in terms of remembering the kind of sacrifices that were put forward back in 1965, but also how so many of them have continued, especially in the war against terrorism, and how it continues to stand today. First, your comments on this very important day.
Yeah, I think 6th September is significant from all angles. So it was a smaller force, Pakistan Army Air Force and Navy, and asymmetrically fighting a very large force. And there are, gallant stories of, valor and courage and defending their motherland. It was all, Air Force, MM Alam, then you had Admiral Kramat Niazi, who was then a junior officer. He goes to attack, Indian ships, and then they defended Karachi. And then Battle of Lahore, Razid Bhatti Shaheed got Nishane Haider in Kashmir, in Sham Jordan. So it was all, I think, and interestingly, if you look at the overall results of 65 war, we defended it, every inch of it, and also captured, some of the areas, especially desert. So it was, I think, fought with a lot of spirit, guts, and courage. And that's why it is very important to highlight it to the youth today, which are getting bewildered, That's how you defend your country. So I think 6th September will always remain, a day to remember, a day to reconnect. And there was also civil military, I would say, bonhomie, and I think it still exists today. Even last year's estimates or the surveys on Pakistan standing in the top position of countries where people are still ready to fight for their country. It was 87%. So that spirit exists, but definitely because of this social media noise, there are certain parties or agencies who are trying to basically undermine this spirit. But I think 6th September is significant from all angles.
Exactly, sir. Brigadier Waqar, when we talk about obviously 65 war, we do talk about Chavinda because Chavinda gets highlighted very much. And when we talk about Chavinda, Pakistan Armored Corps, we always highlight that. I just wanted to know a story from yourself, as you yourself are a historian when it comes to Pakistan's wars. If you could highlight the role of 25 cavalry, how they fought, especially two names they keep on ringing, that is of Lieutenant Colonel Nisar, and then there was another name, Naib Risaldar Khaliq. Obviously, both of them, they get their names highlighted. Just wanted to know if you could shed some light on their particular stories of valor, and if you can leave a message for the generations in today's generations so that they can learn from their sacrifices.
Yeah, Chivinda is significant because the battle was fought in the Ravi Chenab corridor or the Rachna Dua.
Unfortunately, I think we have lost contact, but we'll try and establish contact once again from Brigadier Waqar, and of course take his input from this as well, because as you highlighted, Faisal, this is extremely important in terms of remembering the kind of sacrifices that have been put forward, and to listen to the stories of valor and courage as well, so that we get inspired by that. But in terms of also what earlier Brigadier Saab was talking about, especially in terms of how the current youth also looks at the armed forces in these institutions, do you think that over the years there has been any shift in the way that we have looked towards the armed forces, or our trust and confidence in the institution, especially with the kind of unfortunate propaganda that we have seen recently?
Yes, Anna, if we obviously look at the role of the army in the country, especially whenever there were thicks and thins, they have always been there for Pakistan. And when it comes to their relation with the people of Pakistan, it has always been cemented, and it has always been known for, people were known for having huge respect and love for the armed forces. If we particularly take the example of 1965 war, of course we know the way people came out for their forces, and along with their forces, shoulder to shoulder, they wanted to fight. But of course the forces, they said to them that you for now can obviously take a look into the civilian life, and of course leave the war to us. If you are needed, we will of course ask your help. But as you have mentioned that the relation between both, is it sort of shifted? No, I don't see that, because that love and respect have always been there for the armed forces. And even if we go to any school, and majority of the kids, when they are asked what do they want to be in the future, majority of them, they would always prefer that they see themselves in uniform, they see themselves fighting for Pakistan, they see themselves struggling and striving for Pakistan.
Right, and that's wonderful to hear. We've been rejoined by Brigadier Waqar Saab. Waqar Saab, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear. I think there was a
right. Please continue. You were going to share some stories of bravery and courage with us.
Yeah, I think I was correct that basically Jita or Ravindra was the main effort taken. And within that, it was led by the Indian backed 1st Armored Division, which is also known as the Black Elephant, the Fakhre Hind. And then there were two divisions following. 25 cavalry was responsible for defense of Sialkot and Chavinda sector. But that was at that time the only armor regiment available, because the reserve was then supposed to join later on. So mainly, if you look at the clashes between David and the Goliath, because in terms of, I think, firepower and resources, India was 10-1. And in terms of tank-to-tank ratio, it was 1 to 6. One for Pakistan and 6 tanks from the Indian side. And it started on 8th September. Unit had just arrived from Narawal and was refueling. Then the villagers basically highlighted that there are a lot of noises. And this was early morning. And CO Colonel Nisar Kaka, who was basically, his name, then retired as a brigadier. He's basically was Colonel Nisar Ahmed Khan. But why he was called Kaka was because of simple, austere living, and he was to, be very comfortable with the troops. So that's how he was like a fatherly figure. And then we had great names, like I just like to mention, like Major Raza Sitara Jurat. Then we had Major Ahmad Sitara Jurat, who became a brigadier. Sardar Razul Hassan Sitara Jurat. Then Captain Farrukh, who became a lieutenant general. Then Captain Mahmood Ali Durrani, who was a major general. And then Captain Shamshad. And then Naib Sadar Khalik, a Shahid, who got Sitara Jurat. So all told, this is one of the most rated regiments in Pakistan Armored Corps. They got 5 Sitara Jurat and 10 Sitara Jurat. So that basically speaks of why this battle is important. And from 8th to 14th, in 2 phases, this unit took on the Indian Armored Division, and literally in the first exchange, it was 25 to 46 tanks that was taken out. And Indian put their leading wave was very prized units, like Chief of Army Staff General Chaudhary put his 16th Cavalry, and then 17 Pune Horse, one of the best regiments in the front. And incidentally, Naib Sardar Khalik Shahid was responsible for an operation that captured the tank of the commanding officer of 17 Pune Horse. And it stayed in my unit because I also come from 25 killed in our quarter guard for a very long time. And then that tank is now in Lahore Museum. So I think this is a great battle where the mid-level officers, mission officers, and Jawan fought well and with Chavinda and pushed back the enemy onslaught.
Right, absolutely. And Farrukh, whenever we hear about these stories, we also hear about the fact that the odds were never, unfortunately, in our favor in this situation, and because of that, we also keep on emphasizing how our resolve and our commitment to protect the motherland was always something that came into play and was a huge factor, despite the fact that we were outnumbered in many cases. And this is important, especially in the way that we've been dealing with different threats beyond 1965 as well, and the way that this commitment then plays out in protecting us. How much of do you think the fact that the nation and the civilian leadership also talks about standing by with the armed forces contributes to them also reinvigorating their own resolve and boost their morale to defend us?
Right, Sana, and that is important. Other panelists have already paid homage to the sacrifices made on this day on 1965 because that is very important, Sana. Pakistan is a country that was born in such a tricky situation that everybody kept on predicting its premature demise. But the only factor that has actually repeatedly rescued us is the valiant armored forces of the country who have been sacrificing for quite some time, and we have seen that, right? But because your question is more than that, I wanted to actually talk about a couple of things as well.
Okay.
Regarding, the wars that Pakistan has fought, and Pakistan still is fighting. War on terror continues even today. And as you pointed out earlier in your introduction, there are sacrifices that are being given even now. Remember, we can always attribute certain sacrifices to certain jobs and say that that is part of their remit. It is really not. You can pay a person to serve the country. You can pay a person to fight some enemy. But to sacrifice life, that is something beyond any call of duty. And we have seen, just for a second, put yourself in the mind or in the skull of somebody who is actually fighting even now. And while they are fighting, there is fog of war. The enemy is also using propaganda, your own religion perhaps, to confuse you. And you have lost a limb or two, and you are aware that you might die even now, but you don't give up. You keep on fighting, right? Now, I was looking at what kind of mindset would lead to such supreme sacrifice. And I went through a book that I have repeatedly read, and it is beautiful. It is Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. There's meaning, he actually was subjected to Holocaust and all those rigors or those punishing, situations. And yet he said that what cured him or made him survive or endure was meaning in life, that you actually amount to something more than your body, right? And that is important to remember. That was merely meaning of curing others. Here somebody loves the country so much. Their meaning is so sublime that they are ready to sacrifice, and their families are ready to sacrifice their children. So how can we pay homage or just do away with all that, especially because in this country, because of politics, because of so many distortions, and what we saw on May 9th, there are people who keep on trying to pull down those institutions who have been a beacon of, brightness of light in this country, a beacon of hope. As long as your army is standing, I understand, Faisal, you want to chip in, but I just was winding up. Right now, I think as long as there's armed forces of Pakistan and they're standing tall and they're fighting for Pakistan, we know that a country which was repeatedly left for dead, which was pronounced dead when terrorism was at peak, when India actually annihilated half of the country. Even at that moment, we knew this country will keep on going forward, and today it is. I hope that in coming days we also see more victories, and I wish, I'm tired of the idea of dead heroes. I want to see alive heroes. So I don't want more sacrifices. I want our leaders, our heroes to be defended and people standing up for them.
Right. Brigadier Waqar, I'm glad Farrukh also pointed out towards May 9th, because while we talk about the importance and the kind of honor that is there in the way that our soldiers have laid down their lives, and we respect and pay tribute to the martyrs, of course, it's tragic to remember a day where, unfortunately, the kind of honor that is attached with martyrs in the way that we remember them was disrespected, and a lot of their families also got very, very hurt by those acts of violence. But I want to then understand, given what happened back in May, how do we move forward in ensuring that the people at large also understand that this is something that is truly very sacred and very important to not just the families of the martyrs, but to all of us as a nation, and that any martyr that has given their life for the defense of the motherland continues to, of course, defend us, and we owe it to all the martyrs and all the armed forces to stand with them.
Yeah, I think the ninth May is also an act of in the past 1 year. Actually, we live in a post-era. Everybody has his own truth and their own facts. Even Trump said that we have our own facts. So this is, I think, a universal phenomena. But till the time it remains in the information domain, maybe it's okay. But if you, let's say, consistently build up a narrative of poison against an institution or defenders, and then you weaponize, that's dangerous. Like, Trump was able to weaponize assault on the Capitol Hill. Maybe it was slightly in a different domain. But then one of the political parties weaponizing information domain and then converted into physical assault. That's dangerous. And I think that was unprecedented. But by and large, I think their designs were defeated. It was not only, an effort to undermine the military morale and then maybe trivialize that here's the nuclear power, and they can't even defend. Despite that, military actually showed restraint. Imagine if they were fired upon, you had 100, dead bodies on the railroad. It could have become disastrous. So I think there was restraint. But main thing is that there was also an effort to affect the army chain of command. That's my own personal analysis, because they were trying to highlight. You look at the calls that are coming from London and North America, and even some of, I think, unfortunately, American congressmen also joined, or Zalmay Khalilzad, chipping in. So there was, and then there was a lot of assault by the Indian media. So it can happen, but I think assault on military garrisons, monuments, Shoda monuments, and your legends like Air Force aircraft is very, very unfortunate. But that was the last time, because they failed. because people were, I think, it did not rally. It was only, some of their activists who were going to face the trial. But there's a lesson learned that you cannot, allow weaponization of information. In India, I'll just give you an example. In social media laws are so strict that 10 of their agencies, right, starting from research analysis wing, the CID, and the enforcement directorate, and down to Delhi police and Kashmir police, occupied Kashmir police, are allowed to stop you anywhere on the street. Take your mobile phone or the laptop or the desktop, take out the data and charge you for that. So this is the kind of control India exercises, which calls itself, liberal democracy. So states do protect it. Like in France, you have basically a cyber police. You try to do it in Middle
For
East,
that,
you do it in Saudi Arabia.
right, I just
So
want
I
to
think there
explore
are
that a bit further because I want to understand whether you are proposing that such sort of control is important or necessary or even recommended in Pakistan, or something that should be there in order to make sure that the people understand what is going on. Because I want to then, of course, understand what perspective you're coming from and how then you're going to navigate that with freedom of expression as well, which is again something extremely important to people all over the world, including Pakistanis. And I know that there are lines for everything and boundaries for everything, but I want to know and understand what you're proposing here.
I think this is being universally applied. That probably there's threat to democracy and freedom of action, freedom of information. It is not. Pakistan is, I think, the most free, at least in the media domain. And if you look at, look at the autocratic states like Russia, China, Middle East, Iran, okay. Turkey is a democracy. India, I've told you. And then you come to the West. Why Trump is arrested, being charged for treason, being charged for assault on Capitol Hill. So I think there are red lines even. And then you have UK, you go to France. So people are very strict, when it comes to national interest. They will not allow it. Go to Israel. These are all democracies. And look at the way they control it. What I am proposing basically is, and I think we have to move on that there should be red lines of national security. And even I think anybody's individual, I think, izzat is very important, the way it is trivialized. So we need to actually move forward. And then definitely, like UK, there are laws, they didn't come up with social media laws. They said what was criminalized outside on the street, you can't abuse anybody on the street, so you can't do it on social. Very simple, same punishment. So I think they are falling. Here we have, I think, a lot of leverage given, and that's what is exploited. And then, of course, the hostile agencies join in. We know how social media campaigns are run, how the artificial intelligence is, injected, a lot of fake news. There got to be, the state has to do it. I'm not saying that you suppress it, but there got to be limits. And I think so, Pakistan should look into it because we are facing a lot of challenges.
Brigadier Waqar, when you talk about, of course, Qaid-e-Azam's principles, unity, faith, discipline, in obviously, Army's term, we call it during the battle integration. If we look at the Chwinda sector or war overall, we saw an excellent display of obviously, battle integration by two forces, Air Force and the ground forces. If you can highlight that as well, plus what was the mood like when it comes to the integration of the people along with the armed forces during the battle?
Yeah, I think second thing first, if you look at the spirit, like I know a lot of stories told by our junior commissioned officers and officers who later on became very senior officers. The way even in Chwinda and Sialkot sector, how the women folk would cook breakfast and even come to the front lines. Let's say the information given about the tanks were from the village, so it means the villagers were actually fighting. There's also a legend of people, having tied down their, bombs or rockets and then lying. And some of the infantry units did it, and they were supported. They were same as in Lahore. If you look at the teachers, the doctors, because in war normally you have stress on the medical system. So doctors came forward, the teachers came forward, the students and the women folk. And I think this was a great, and this was all along, even in Sindh you had the Hur battalions of, in Sindh. They were basically civilians who actually captured I think, one of the largest area in Kashmir salient. So it means that civilians were definitely part of this process. And there was a lot of unity, and as you said, unity, faith, and discipline was displayed. Now, in terms of integration, I think we didn't have a joint staff headquarters. So basically, it was on the land, because other than the Karachi sector or Run of Kutch, where you can have, let's say, tri-service, especially if you have a land operation going. So by service, I think coordination was excellent. Defense of Karachi and then air support and reconnaissance support to our operations in the Dwarka. Although there were no satellites or drones, and I don't think we had deep long-range reconnaissance aircraft. In Chavinda and Lahore, it was excellent. One of my uncles, Air Commodore Sajad Haider, is a far relative, so he actually narrates how basically the Air Force was helping when they would go and strike Indian in Pathankot, Halwada, Adampur, and Jamnagar. While coming back, they would then pass the information. And definitely, by service, the coordination was excellent between Navy Air Force and Army Air Force. And that was also, I think, one of the dominating factors. I just mentioned Harbaksh Singh because normally, like one of the parties says that we lost all of us, very, very absurd. 48, we won Kashmir. 65 was a clear victory. 71, definitely there was a debacle, but on West Pakistan, we fought very well. Kargil, we gave them a bloody nose, and then you have swift retort. So I don't think so. This narrative is correct. Harbaksh Singh himself, I think he's the authority, he was a lieutenant general.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Brigadier Waqar. Unfortunately, that's all that we have time for, but thank you for joining us and being a part of the discussion. We're going to also be talking about what is going on in terms of the kind of increased threats that the country is facing, especially in terms of terrorist activities and what happened in Chitral today. And Farrukh, that also brings me to what Brigadier Waqar was talking about in terms of the kind of coordination that existed between, of course, different forces and the kind of collective response that is required. And now, of course, the threat is different. Perhaps back in 1965 or 71, it's a different situation with a clear enemy. And right now, everything is so nuanced and complicated, especially in terms of the war against terrorism within the country as well. And there's so many moving parts and variables that are needed to work in tandem. How do you think that the change in the way, in the kind of threats that we're having to deal with is something that also needs to be reflected or is reflected in our strategic response?
Right, Sana. While one can never undermine the supreme sacrifices that were given in 1965, at that time one thing was clear, and that was who is the enemy. And that actually makes things easier because then you are fighting and you fight to the death or you fight to the victory, right? But here something is very different. One, you are fighting on your own turf, on your own land. And the people who are fighting back or who are actually attacking you are using your own religion as a propaganda tool. So that actually confuses a lot of people. And I think that the remarkable thing about Pakistan Armed Forces and the way we have been fighting back is that we have kept our sanity. We have stayed in touch with our own ethos, and we have just then been able to tell the difference between Islam or our identity and the terrorists. That is very important. Today, for example, in Chitral, the attack was, do you know where exactly was the locus of the attack? It was in Kailash area, right? Kailash area is not predominantly Muslim. They have their own culture. It is one of Pakistan's tourist attractions. And we always, whenever we are talking about tourism, we actually project their culture as well, because they connect with ancient Greek culture. And what was the purpose? I think that these terrorists keep on showing how they're connected with your worst enemies possible. That they are one by one eroding all things that are great in this country. So it is amazing that our armed forces repulsed that attack. I hope they are able to do it in the future as well. But there is one aspect that is important, because you questioned about integration and how well-oiled machine we have got. Our armored component is continuing to fight without any hitch. We know our police has been sacrificing as well, and our LEAs. The biggest problem is in the civilian side. And that actually takes us back to your original question previously when you asked what the political class has been doing. I think the biggest problem with the political class is that they have been sacrificing national interests at the altar of populism, political usefulness, and that's why usually whenever there is a threat, they end up actually running an interference campaign and a propaganda campaign. I hope they learn from it and they stop it, because then they are only making themselves irrelevant.
Absolutely. Let us also welcome in the discussion Brigadier Retired Raashid Wali, Janjua's Director of Research. IPRI, thank you very much, Janjua Sahab, for joining us and being part of the show. Today, of course, as we observe the Defence and Martyrs Day, we're also talking about the very important security attack that we have seen in terms of the way that our security personnel have responded to the terrorist attack in Chitral near the Pak-Afghan border. And I know that 12 terrorists have been killed, but I also know that 4 security forces have also embraced martyrdom. And this is not just the first attack that we've seen. There's many others that we've seen in the past month and in the year alone. So I want to then understand, given of course the fact that our resolve is there, and even on Defence Day today, we've seen our armed forces defend us once again. But I want to then understand that how exactly are we looking at the situation in a broader sense in terms of how we deal with it. Are we only doing it in terms of the kind of attacks that we see and our knee-jerk reactions to it and our responses to it, which of course is there, they can curtail it. But is there an overall strategy, a preemptive one, also in place?
Thank you very much. I think strategy should be very clear by now, because we are in this for quite some time now. And those who are dealing with these threats, I think they are completely privy to the obtaining security environment. And the strategy has to be put into operation at multiple levels. There is a politico-strategic level, there is a operational level, and I think on all these fronts adequate efforts are being done. But this attack is yet another gory reminder of the terror that still stalks our land, and our borders are not safe. We know, and we have been talking about these things, that the interim Afghan government is not in complete control of the areas, and the TTP elements, their movement and concentration was being monitored in the Kunar and Nuristan provinces of Afghanistan. And because of that, our posts were given adequate warning, and they were well configured to receive this attack. And a very robust response has been given, but at heavy cost. And we must now look at these issues from a multiple dimensional perspective. Now, the intelligence-based operations and the whole strategic intelligence effort has to be ramped up. Afghan interim government has to be further engaged and pressurized to exercise some kind of control. Whether they are capable of doing so or not is another question. And then they should be very clearly indicated that Pakistan then reserves the right to carry out some kind of attacks, in pursuit of its security objectives. And to that end, I think some planning should also be underway. Then we have to make a proper arrangement that
because you pointed out that they need to be pressurized, and there needs to be an understanding that if there isn't any will or capacity, then that's another thing. But we sort of established this yet, the kind of scale or level of response that we can possibly expect from them, given how much we've achieved so far or lack thereof. Because I want to know then how much further are we actually waiting before then we go to plan B, as you mentioned.
And Brigadier Janjua, if you can also add this question in, that shouldn't we be talking with the Taliban regime about the joint operations, the joint calming operations in 2 of the provinces, Kunnad basically, and then Nangarhar?
And Brigadier Sahab, my apologies that I am further adding to your burden, but because there is a logical extension to what other our hosts are saying, I just wanted to know, you mentioned kinetic option, right? There is another kinetic option that America actually keeps on talking about, that is over the horizon attacks on Afghanistan's bases. Is there a possibility that instead of actually going alone, Pakistan can work in tandem with other powers like the US to take care of these problems?
I think all these options are on the table. And you mentioned engagement with the Taliban and joint operations. Already, Afghan interim government and our law enforcement security agencies, as well as the diplomatic channels, they are in complete accord about the need for more intelligence based operations. And there are several things being done beyond the media glare, which for obvious diplomatic reasons cannot be shared, and for right reasons too. Uh, Afghan interim government is amenable to more such cooperative engagements, and it is up to us now to firm up our own security response. Over the horizon, you mentioned over the horizon, obviously the option is there, and in the past it was exercised in some measure like artillery duels and engagements. Those terrorist threats from wherever they are emanating, if a concrete threat is identified and the targets are presented, those would be engaged. Then there are so many illegal Afghan residents. We know that only 1.3 million Afghan refugees are properly registered, and 2.2 million are still unregistered. Now that thing has also to be seen, that what to do with these elements, and the time has come that perhaps a more strict measure has to be taken, and we have to ensure that our border controls are so strong that even from the legal border channels, there are no crossings that make use of the legal channels to filter in the terrorists, the ones who can then come and launch attacks on the law enforcement agencies. Then we have to put up a very robust structure. We have to strengthen our posts, FC posts, Chitral Scouts, and paramilitary forces. The armed forces, they're already quite strongly mobilized. We have army presence now in newly merged districts, and operations are already underway. And there's no shortcut. It's going to be long haul, and we have to show patience. We have to show perseverance, resilience, and courage. And we have to take the civilian law enforcement agencies, counterterrorism department, and the whole governance structure of the newly merged districts and the border area has to be looked at from a perspective of ensuring that the local population is at least secured and they are given fair measure of stability, so that they are so reassured so as not to be browbeaten by those elements who are trying to now come and establish their sanctuaries. And I think it's a holistic approach. Army is using the kinetic options. Over the horizon options are also being firmed up. In many ways, IBOs are being done, and there are certain things which are not shared. And I think it is best that the Afghan interim government is properly engaged and strongly engaged, and a strong message is sent that no amount of destabilization would be permitted, and the patience has a limit. But still, most of the engagement should be done beyond the media glare.
Right, absolutely. Janjua Sahab, with reference to, of course, what we've seen in terms of the on-ground responses, unfortunately, it is more, especially in terms of KP, more the police and security personnel on ground that faces the brunt of the attacks and are the first responders. And I know you talked about strategy in place, and there is, of course, talk of zero tolerance, and that may be there. But in terms of this actually moving away from paper and actually on ground having a devolved status in terms of what exactly is going on, and a framework that is already established. Do you think that there is something, any element in this entire framework that's missing, especially in terms of us being able to empower the first responders and have that sort of coordination in our way forward?
I'm going to add to this question and actually reframe it. Do you think that we need a National Action Plan 2.0, and what might be the salient features of that?
I think National Action Plan 2.0, there are no two opinions. That should be fully implemented. And as I said that when the newly merged districts were created, the commensurate administrative, legal and police structure did not keep pace with the political integration. Now, on papers, they are newly merged districts. FCR has been, removed, and but on ground there's nothing. It's a vacuum. So unless that vacuum is filled up, the development is properly done. We know that in NFC award, a CCI meeting, there was an outlay of 110 billion rupees for development of newly merged districts. Only 38 billion has been released, and I don't know how much has been actually spent to make meaningful difference to the lives of the people, because it is the tribes and the people that we have to make secure, and we have to then make sure that the elements who are crossing back, they do not browbeat them into submission and create a kind of a disaffection against the state. You mentioned about the kinetic options. If I can lay my finger on the most important thing, that is the need for timely, robust and effective intelligence. Our intelligence, both and mostly in the counterterrorism department and the civilian agencies, they need a lot of capacity building, because they are the first, they have to be the first responders, because if everything is left to Army and FC and the huge vacuum that is there in civilian counterterrorism department and intelligence gathering, that creates a perpetual imbalance. So that needs to be addressed on emergency basis at priority. And rest of the counterterrorism approach, which is based upon use of IBOs by the army forces, the FC, they are all being very robustly articulated on ground, and that is why that TTP depredations are still within a manageable limit, because had it not been for the continual pushback by Army and FC and its intelligence apparatus, things could have been much worse by now.
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much, Janjua, for joining us and being a part of the discussion, talking to us at length about the kind of responses that are needed in terms of us responding to the security challenges. Farrukh, anything you'd like to quickly add?
Right, Sana, very quickly, I just wanted to actually tell you, today is Defense Day, but it also holds personal significance for me, because it marks my 10 years with Pakistan Television. 10 years ago, on this day, I joined the channel. And just to show you how far along we have come, I remember those days when we were actually not permitted by the political class to call our own soldiers martyrs, and we couldn't call terrorists, right? Okay. And we had to actually push back, and I remember the kind of pushback I had to actually go for to actually make it possible. But today, if we can openly associate or laud our sacrifices of our heroes, I think that is a huge deal. And I'm glad that after 10 years at least we have changed a cultural shift. We have brought it. And it is
and you have a huge part to play in that. So
and Sana, regarding obviously Defense Day, I just wanted to add another line, and that is that taking place, I mean, whatever has happened today, this attack, taking place on our Defense Day, it is quite significant as well, because this is the very day that we gobsmacked India, and we know very well that TTP is actually our mercenaries of India, and they get paid from India. So happening it on the very day when we gobsmacked India, it's quite significant as well.
Right, but it's also significant, of course, in terms of the way that we've responded yet again, and so that also is another message. that is significant once again. But of course, our resolve continues, and we continue to stand by our armed forces in the fight against terrorism and any other threats to Pakistan. And this is going to be something that we'll not only be observing every Defence and Martyrs Day, but of course every day. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll now see you tomorrow.